On a warm June night in a small Iowa town, 8 people went to sleep inside a quiet white house. By the next morning, all 8 were dead, and a killer had walked out the front door and vanished into history. More than 100 years later, no one knows who did it. This is the Villisca axe murders, and this is what happened in their last hours. Villisca, Iowa in 1912 was the kind of town where nobody locked their doors. It had a few thousand people, a main street with brick storefronts, churches on the corners, and farmland stretching out in every direction. People knew their neighbors. Children played in the streets until dark. It was, by every account, a safe and ordinary place. That is part of what makes this story so frightening. What happened in Villisca was not supposed to be possible there. At the center of the story is the Moore family. Josiah Moore was 43 years old, a well-liked businessman who had built a good life selling farm equipment. His wife, Sarah, was 39. Together they had 4 children. Herman was 11, Catherine was 10, Boyd was 7, and the youngest, Paul, was just 5 years old. They lived in a modest 2-story house on 2nd Street, and by all accounts they were a happy, respected family, the sort of people who sat near the front at church. On Sunday, June 9, 1912, the Presbyterian Church held its annual Children's Day program. It was a special evening, a celebration where the children of the congregation sang and performed. Sarah Moore had helped organize it. The program ran late into the evening, ending at around 9:30. When it was over, the Moore children had 2 friends with them, 2 sisters. Lena Stillinger was 12 years old, and her little sister Ina was 8. The Stillinger girls had asked their parents if they could spend the night at the Moore house, and permission was given. It was a small, ordinary kindness, the kind of thing that happens in a close community on a summer night. 2 girls staying over with friends after church. So the group walked home together through the warm, dark streets of Villisca. Josiah and Sarah, their 4 children, and the 2 Stillinger sisters. 8 people. They reached the house on 2nd Street at around 9:45. The lamps were lit. The children were settled into their beds upstairs, the 2 guests in a downstairs bedroom. And one by one, the house went dark and quiet. Sometime in the deep hours of that night, while the entire household slept, someone came into the house. We know a few things about that person, but not nearly enough. We know they were already inside, or came in quietly through an unlocked door because there was no sign of a forced entry. We know they were patient. Investigators came to believe the killer may have waited, hidden, perhaps in the attic, until the family was deep in sleep. And we know that they moved through that house in the dark with a terrible, methodical calm, going from room to room, and that when they were finished, all 8 people inside were gone. The weapon was an axe that belonged to Josiah himself, taken from his own yard. The killer did not hurry away afterward. That is one of the strangest parts of this case. Whoever did this lingered in the house, and they left behind a scene so deliberate, so strange, that it has haunted investigators for over a century. The morning of June 10th was ordinary at first. The sun came up over Villisca, and next door a neighbor named Mary Peckham noticed something was wrong. The Moore house was completely still, no smoke from the chimney. No one had come out to do the morning chores. The children were not up. By 7 in the morning, Mary had grown uneasy. She went and knocked on the door. No one answered. She tried the door and she let the Moore's chickens out, and still the house stayed silent. Worried now, Mary called Josiah's brother, Ross Moore. Ross came over, knocked, called out, and got no reply. He had a key, or he found one, and he let himself into the parlor. He called out again into the quiet house. And then he opened the door to the downstairs guest bedroom, and he saw enough to know that something unspeakable had happened. He did not go any further. He stepped back outside and told Mary Peckham to call the sheriff. He could not bring himself to say what he had seen. When the authorities finally went through the whole house, they found all 8 victims, each one in their bed, each one killed in their sleep. Josiah and Sarah in their room, the 4 more children in theirs, the 2 Stillinger sisters downstairs. The town doctor and a growing crowd of stunned neighbors moved through the rooms, and in doing so without meaning to, they destroyed much of the evidence that might have caught the killer. In 1912, in a small Iowa town, no one knew how to protect a crime scene. And what a strange scene it was. Every mirror in the house and every pane of glass the killer could reach had been covered with cloth. The faces of the victims had been covered with bedsheets. The curtains were drawn. Josiah's axe was left leaning in the downstairs bedroom, wiped but still the weapon. In the kitchen, there was a pan of bloody water where the killer had washed. There was a plate of uneaten food. And on the kitchen table, a slab of bacon sat beside the axe, as if the intruder had moved it for no reason anyone could explain. But the detail that has chilled investigators the most is this. In the downstairs bedroom, near the body of 12-year-old Lena Stillinger, there were signs that she may have been awake, that she may have tried to defend herself. Of all the people in that house, she may have been the only one who saw what was coming, and we will never know what she saw. The town of Villisca was thrown into terror and grief. 8 people, 6 of them children, murdered in a single night in a house in the middle of town, while neighbors slept a few yards away and heard nothing. And the most frightening question of all hung over everything. Who could have done this, and where had they gone? The investigation that followed was long, confused, and ultimately doomed. The crime scene had been trampled. There was no fingerprint science as we know it. There were bloodhounds and theories and a parade of suspects, but no certainty. Over the years, several names rose to the surface. The first was a traveling minister named Reverend George Kelly. Kelly was a strange and troubled man who had been in Villisca that very weekend and had left town on the early morning train. He was known to behave oddly, and over time he gave statements that seemed to some like confessions. Kelly was actually brought to trial, not once but twice. The first trial ended with a hung jury. The second ended in acquittal. A jury was not convinced he was the killer. And to this day, historians argue about whether the confessions police obtained from him were real or coerced from a vulnerable, suggestible man. Another name was Frank Jones, a powerful local businessman and state senator. Josiah Moore had once worked for Jones, then left to start his own competing business, and had reportedly taken some of Jones's customers with him. There were rumors of bad blood. Some believed Jones had hired someone to kill the Moores out of spite, perhaps a man named William Mansfield, who some suspected was a traveling killer responsible for similar axe murders in other towns. But it was all rumor and theory. Nothing could be proven. And that is perhaps the most haunting fact of the Villisca case. It was never solved. There was no confession that held up, no piece of evidence that closed the door. The killer who walked through that house in the dark, who covered the mirrors and the faces, who washed his hands in the kitchen and walked out into the Iowa night, was never caught. He simply disappeared, and he took the answer with him. What makes Villisca linger in the mind is not only the horror of what happened, but the ordinariness of the people it happened to. The Moores were not famous. They had no enemies that anyone could prove. They were a kind, respected family who went to a children's church program on a summer Sunday and invited 2 little girls to sleep over. They did everything right, and it did not matter. Today, the house on 2nd Street still stands. It has been restored to look as it did in 1912, and it is open to visitors who want to understand what happened there. People walk through the small rooms, up the narrow staircase, and stand in the quiet where 8 lives ended. The mirrors are uncovered now, but the question that the killer left behind still hangs in the air, unanswered after more than a century. 8 people went to sleep in that house, trusting the safety of their own beds, in a town where nobody locked their doors. And in the last hour of that warm June night, someone proved that no door, locked or not, could keep the darkness out. Thank you for watching. If this story stayed with you, Take a moment to remember the Moore family and the Stillinger sisters, 8 ordinary people whose killer was never named. Subscribe to The Last Hour, and we will see you in the next case.